Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here and I'm back with my updated Game Week 1 team draft. As you guys know, the previous iteration of the draft was a 4-3-3 template and that included Anthony Martial. The reason why I'm not actually interested in that so far is because of Sancho's illness and injury concerns, and then also the Ronaldo situation not really being clarified at this point in time, and there's no real reason to punt into Martial for me. I really think there's a lot more value in the defense, and that's why I've still gone for a slightly inflexible structure, but I have opted to go for a 5-3-2. And the reason why is because I think there's such great options within the defenders. If you just look at my team right now, it does have a backbone of Sanchez and Ward. So I have downgraded from the previous iteration, going from Ederson to Sanchez. And the reason why that is because I think Ward now presents so much value as a potential Leicester starting keeper, especially with Schmeichel on his way to Nice. You do have that option now of maybe going for Ward and actually rotating with Sanchez. And I think if you look at the game week by game week structure, where Ward has good home games, Sanchez actually usually has pretty bad away games. And I think the rotation is perfect there to actually allow me to save much money for my team. And if you look at the defense, the one key thing that I'm missing here clearly is going to be Reece James. He has around 40% ownership right now, but I do really feel that this Chelsea defense still needs time to get organized. There are key pieces that are missing, and there's also key pieces that I would say are essential that just haven't been recruited. Chelsea were looking for another centre-back in Koundé, and they didn't manage to kind of get that deal sealed, and I really think that impacts Reece James and his ability to play consistent minutes at right wing-back. Over the course of the preseason, you could argue that Tuchel maybe wanted to have Reece James rested as much as possible and not playing constant 90 minutes, but ultimately we have seen the Hudson-Odoi sub. You still see the rumours that Dumfries or even Cucurella are players that Chelsea are going for, and I think that just makes me a little bit more hesitant to go for someone like Reece James, where I think at 6.0, if he's week in, week out playing right wing back and playing 90 minutes, I'd be much more comfortable around him. But I think Chelsea actually have probably better options at this point because their fixtures are so good to go for the attacking options, and I don't really see too much value in going for the defenders. I still think Mendy, for example, is a good 5.0 keeper, but for now I think there's much more value, as I said, in the rotation of Sanchez and Ward. And even if, let's say, Ward doesn't end up being the starting keeper for Leicester, I still feel quite comfortable in going for a safe option like Sanchez as my keeper. Similar to the previous iteration of the draft, I have a lot of players that I discussed previously about: Robertson, Trent, Cancelo. They're all fixtures in my draft. Even Gabriel, I mentioned the opportunity to go into Gabriel, try and test that Leicester defense, try and test that Crystal Palace defense as a really good example of why I've gone for Gabriel, especially over Zinchenko. If you look at the heat map that Zinchenko provided when they actually beat Sevilla 6-0, you can see he actually does hug, I would say, the middle of the pitch quite a lot, and he actually holds that position quite well. He doesn't really move into advanced positions like some of the other fullbacks. If you compare, for example, Robertson's performance in the Community Shield match, the kind of positions that he was getting into, he was very consistently getting into the box. I don't think you're going to get that from Zinchenko. It's clearly a role that Martinelli and even Jesus will be occupying. So spatially, if you look at Jesus's first goal versus Sevilla, he actually started out wide in the left wing position and then actually cut inside eventually as the play progressed, where someone like Zinchenko is going to stay further back, holding this Arsenal team shade together. And that's what kind of makes me not so interested in Zinchenko, even though he might be nailed to start the season. By contrast, I would say Perisic is someone who I've included back into my team, and that's simply just because his fitness has been confirmed. I mentioned that Perisic was someone that I would be interested in going for, and the Chelsea preseason results from a defensive point of view don't look any better. I think offensively they look much more interesting when Kante and Kovacic are playing together, and ultimately I just think there's more value from Perisic as an individual player, and I think I have guarantees at least that he will be playing, in my opinion, 70 to 80 minutes starting off before he gets full fitness. And for me, even though Sessegnon is an option, and Conte has mentioned that Sessegnon can be an option just like Emerson, I still think Perisic is the much better player compared to Doherty when you look at how productive he can be from the offensive point of view. And that's exactly why I've gone for Perisic over Reece James at this point. I have thought about some draft structures where I would include James in my draft, and potentially that means going for someone like Ramsdale, therefore allowing myself to go for a back five, which includes James and Perisic. But for now, I'm not super interested in that. I think this is going to be my default defensive lineup, unless, let's say, Chelsea get another defensive transfer that makes me confident at least that Reece James is going to play right wing back as I'd like him to. If we move on to the midfield now, I've actually moved into Saka as opposed to Martinelli, and that's because I still wanted to keep 3 Arsenal players in my team. Here in this structure, by going for Saka, I have someone who I would say is potentially nailed on penalties. It actually seems to be the case that whoever actually earns the penalty in this Arsenal team is actually free and has the license to take penalties. If you cast your mind back to the previous season, Arteta did mention he was quite surprised at one point when Martinelli did not take the penalty when Saka earned a penalty versus Chelsea. But things might have changed since then. Saka has actually been quite good at his penalty taking, and I really think that gives me a bit more comfort in terms of going for Saka, because ultimately within this draft structure, I have a lot of money saved because of how price efficient the defenders are. And Saka is someone who gets more goals. Martinelli has been incredibly involved this season. In my opinion, you could really go for a triple Arsenal attack. You could go for Martinelli and Saka, but I just like the value that Gabriel holds in my team. I like the chances for going for set pieces. Ultimately, Gabriel is someone who I would say is a little bit more assistive, and Saka is much more direct in terms of goal scoring and could also be that person who gets the goals, especially through penalties. One thing people will say, of course, as I said, if the person earning the penalty is the one who takes it, I think you still have to look at who actually gets the penalties most often. Saka is someone who's incredibly great at drawing fouls. I would say Jesus as well. Martinelli is someone who we do see sometimes in the box, but I would say less so compared to Saka and Jesus. And that's why I'm a little bit more interested in Saka and Jesus being in my team, being that kind of coveted double Arsenal attack pieces that I have. Bailey is someone who I've actually made way for and let Neto go for, because ultimately now I have 0.5 million in the bank. I can be a little bit more flexible with my options. I can move into Neto if I really think that there's a huge regret of mine. I really like the Bournemouth game week 1 fixture. It doesn't seem like a happy situation, I'd say, within the Bournemouth camp. Scott Parker doesn't seem like he's very confident about the fact that Bournemouth have been unable to bolster the defense and get the defensive signings that they want. He's talking about how competitive they would be before the season has even started, and I really think that's a great game for someone like Bailey, who's shown such great preseason form, to start the season off really hot, just like Benrahma did in the previous year, and that's exactly why I've gone for Bailey. The 0.5 million in the bank will actually allow me to be a bit more flexible, and for me, I think as long as you have at least 99.5 million of your money being spent on the team, you can save that money and you can use it to be a little bit more flexible, catch any price rises that you feel like you've missed. Salah is someone who's a fixture in my draft. Once again, he's going to be my captain. I don't really think this is contentious. Andreas and Colback are going to be my 4.5 options. I think Colback is clearly the second best 4.5 option. I've moved my 4.5 option from Soumare temporarily into Colback just because I don't think Soumare is going to provide anything, whereas Colback is probably going to get 85 minutes per game this season as a midfielder. If we now move on to the forward, the biggest change here has been the move back into Haaland, and that's after a relatively, I would say, contentious Community Shield match that he played versus Liverpool. Jesus has just continuously kicked on. Simply put, I think Jesus is an absolute must in the drafts. I don't really think Jesus is a shield necessarily. I just think he's actually the best priced forward at this point, and I think this Arsenal forward and attacking base is so much stronger compared to some of the other teams such as Chelsea because they're so well priced, and Jesus ultimately is one of those players in that kind of position. And as we kind of discussed with the midfielders being so expensive this year, with maybe, let's say, a couple midfield options being interesting from the budget area from mid-table teams, ultimately, when you're looking at a team like Arsenal, I think you're prospectively saying that they're going to be, I would say, a top 5 attack, and Jesus is really, really well priced as their talisman. Archer is going to be my 4.5 forward. Don't really think there's too much to discuss there. It's between him and Greenwood. I do think Archer will eventually find some spots. I just think Patrick Bamford and Rodrigo are going to be the forwards that are much more interesting for Leeds to actually play. I don't see them dipping into Greenwood or Gelhardt. As far as Archer, Watkins and Ings still have been rather unimpressive, especially in the preseason. I think Archer will eventually get minutes, hopefully, if Gerrard allows that. As for Haaland, he's going to be that big switch up that I have moved away from Kane from, and I think it comes down to a lot of people in their head booking that transfer away from Kane or away from Son in game week 1, moving into and kind of getting away from that Chelsea game that inevitably is going to be very, very tough. We know Stamford Bridge is always a very tough place for Tottenham to play. Chelsea have been their bogey team for, I would say, the better part of 2 to 3 years now. And ultimately, for me, Haaland showed just enough in the Community Shield in terms of his ability to actually find himself in goal-scoring positions. Yes, he completely fluffed a terrible shot. He had some pretty bad touches as well. But I would also say that this City team have the pieces and the tools, with Foden and Alvarez especially looking a lot more interesting in the second half, to actually provide Haaland with adequate chances. De Bruyne is someone who is always very progressive with his passes, and I think he will be someone who can continuously find Haaland in space. Haaland is so fast off the mark, and he always tries to stay on side positionally, that I really like him as an option. And for me, it's a little bit more preferred over someone like Kane, who I think can be quite hit and miss in some games. I think there are games where Tottenham can be packed in and they will struggle to break apart defenses that sit back versus them. Whereas I would say City are very, very good at breaking those teams down consistently and getting great results. And inevitably, especially with all the bad news from the Bournemouth camp, I think Haaland's just a great option to start the season with. So I don't really have to think about a transfer and booking that away to go from Kane to Haaland. So that's going to be my team for now. I hope you guys have a wonderful time, and I'll see you guys in the next video.